Hello and welcome to episode 1 of the Deeply Rested podcast. I am so grateful that you are here, and I'm so excited to introduce you today to the Deeply Rested podcast. For episode 1, I wanted to give you an introduction to this whole idea of being deeply rested as a mission-driven business owner. What does it mean? How do you do it? And I couldn't think of two better people to have this conversation with me today than my former clients and current friends, Arianna Smith and Annie Robershaw. Annie Robershaw is the founder of Delightfully Free, a soulful community for child-free folks rooted in seasonal living, simplicity, and liberation. Weaving together her clinical wisdom, intuitive exploration, and joyful alchemy, Annie helps you get to the core of who you are and what you need to live a sustainable life, infused with your unique gifts and desires. She's a certified EMDR therapist, an approved consultant with the EMDR International Association, and she hosts a cozy EMDR therapist support community. Arianna Smith is a licensed therapist, strategic copywriter, and witchy soul who specializes in helping therapists and healers evaluate their practice through heart-centered, purpose-driven copy and email marketing. By blending clinical insight, intuitive wisdom, and no-fluff content strategy, Arianna helps providers express the essence of their heart's work, authentically connect with their audience, and attract right-fit clients to grow and scale their practices. They are two phenomenal women, and they delivered a vulnerable, heartfelt interview today that I think is going to inspire you and help you understand exactly how you can become deeply rested as a mission-driven business owner. So without further ado, welcome to the Deeply Rested podcast, and I sincerely hope you enjoy today's conversation. Welcome to Deeply Rested, the podcast that helps people doing good work in the world take incredibly good care of themselves. I'm your host, retired therapist and disillusioned business coach, Maegan Megginson. I'm on a mission to help people like you unlearn the rules that keep you trapped in self-doubt so that you can recover from burnout and finally become deeply rested. If you enjoyed today's show, be sure to subscribe to this podcast and join our weekly newsletter at deeplyrested.com/newsletter. Now, it's time for the show. Hello, Arianna and Annie.
Hello.
Hello. So you guys, I'm starting a podcast. Did you know?
Wait, that's why
we're here? Yes. That's why you're here. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I am so excited to have the two of you as my very first guests on the Deeply Rested podcast. How are you both feeling?
Oh my gosh, so excited to watch this happen and see it reach so many people that need to hear what you have to say.
How about you, Ari?
I am so excited. When you first mentioned it, I just felt like a full body yes. Like, this is what Maegan has to do. And I just think you're going to reach so many people that need to hear all the insightful things you want to say.
Oh my goodness. You are both so sweet. So I have with me today Annie Robershaw, Arianna Smith. Annie, say hello so people can hear and feel your voice.
Hi, everyone. I'm Annie.
That's Annie. Ari, what about you?
Hey, it's Ari here.
I am so excited, Annie and Ari, to have the two of you as my first guests because I love you and I know we're going to have a really fun conversation. And also because Annie and Ari are two people who have been with me through the arc of this deeply rested journey.
Yes.
They came to me as clients several years ago and we worked together and now we're friends, which is like a total perk of not doing therapy work, right? Is that we can like work together and then stay friends afterwards and no one's going to get in trouble. I love that. I love that. We've moved through the full cycle of, client and into friendship together. And Annie and Ari started working with me back in my quote business coaching days. I don't do traditional business coaching anymore, but I was years ago. And the two of you came to me because I was talking about doing business coaching in a different way, in a way that aligned more clearly for the two of you. So we're going to talk about all of that today and this journey that we've been on, this deeply rested journey that we've been on together. But what I really want to do in this episode today, and I want y'all's help doing this, is I want to set the stage for Deeply Rested, for the idea, the conversation, what this podcast is going to be all about over the coming years, I hope. And I think the best way to do that is to start by talking about what is so broken about small business ownership for so many of us, right? It's it's not working. If we can just be honest, most small business owners, entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, however you think of yourself, they come to me and they just talk about this is not what I thought it was going to be. And this is really hard. And this is way more stressful than my 9 to 5. Why did I make this transition in the first place? I want this podcast to be a beacon of hope for the people who are questioning why they got into business for themselves and hopefully pave a path for those folks, people just like the three of us, to find a way to do business that really does allow them to be deeply rested and, of course, financially successful. So let's rewind. Let's go to the beginning of the journey. I would love to hear thoughts from both of you about why you think people who are in 9 to 5s want to go into business for themselves. Now, what's the fantasy that gets us to take that huge leap into entrepreneurship? Ari, let's hear from you first.
Oh my gosh. Well, I think people often want more freedom, more autonomy, more than 2 weeks, measly weeks of PTO, not being micromanaged, and being, in my case, having the freedom to do whatever you want to do and not having to have someone sign it off, not have to deal with the political BS, and have your day-to-day align with your heart's work, with your life purpose, as opposed to working for someone else.
Yeah. Annie, what would you add to that? Why do you think entrepreneurs want to leave their 9 to 5s to start their own businesses?
Well, definitely, I think Ari hit all the highlights. And I would say freedom is the most important quality for me. And probably secondly, the ability to carve out a business that allows me to be creative and pivot and follow my own energy. Some days I may be in a surge, or a week I might be in a surge and I work 14-hour days. And then the next week I'm more introverted and calm and peaceful and need 4-hour work days. And that ability to just be who I am and follow my own track as I work is super pivotal, but also the creativity, to have an idea, to have an inspiration and be able to follow that and run with it that's what attracted me and probably continues for me as I go.
These are such good answers. Yeah, Ari.
I mean, I would also add, Annie, I love naming how our cycles and our energy levels can shift from day to day. And the 9 to 5 treats us like machines, right? That we have the same amount of energy every day from 9 to 5. And those are the working hours. And if you don't, you're suffering. But hearing you talk about your 14-hour days, I have days like that too, where I'm so nourished and feeling ambitious, right? And I think sometimes folks want to leave a 9 to 5 to have more ease, to have more freedom, but also to accomplish, maybe not accomplish more, but to do more, to reach their potential, to be able to pursue their goals in a way that works for them.
Yeah. Well, to do more that's in alignment with their own vision, right? To bring their own visions to life instead of bringing someone else's vision to life, or just punching the clock and doing work that, really isn't in alignment with your soul's calling. And I think people who step into entrepreneurship often are people who feel some type of deeper calling. They have work that they want to do in the world, and they know they can't do it in the confines of someone else's business, right? Or of a traditional 9 to 5. They want out of that. I love everything that you're both saying. It feels so true. And I would encourage people listening to this conversation to take some time to really reflect on, why did you decide to go into business for yourself in the first place? Like, this is a fantastic starting point for any kind of introspective work you're doing as a business owner. Like, hold up, why did I actually do this? What was my vision for the future when I decided to make this particular sacrifice? If you could have painted a picture of what you thought your life would be like as a business owner, what would the picture have looked like? And then we segue into, well, what does it actually look like? Which is often very different from the fantasy that we have going into business ownership. So there are some through lines in what you're both saying, right? We go into business for ourselves because of freedom and flexibility. Really, I think it all kind of boils down to those two words. Like you said, we want that flexibility to do the work we want to do and to do it in the way that we want to do it. And we want freedom. We want freedom to take time off. We want freedom to, be able to make more money when we need more money and make less money when we need less money. We want to have control over our lives and our visions in a way that we just don't when we're working for someone else. So we take the leap. We start our own businesses, our own practices. We go into work for ourselves. Then what happens? What happens for most people is quite the opposite, right? It's a lot harder than we imagined it would be. We thought we were going into business to make our lives better, but what we end up doing is just creating a business where we are our own worst boss.
Yeah.
And our people pleasing gets like turned up to, 10 times what it was when we were working for somebody else. And we are just trying to please other people, back and forth all the time. What do y'all want to add to that? Like, what do you think in your own experiences and your conversations with friends and colleagues, like what actually happens when we take the plunge and open our own shops?
Oh, I think one of the most common things is that we press the gas and work harder and harder for the hope that we'll be able to rest and have spaciousness. And I think that's the number one thing that I found is I kept adding more complexity and work on complexity to the business and more work on thinking that it was going to lead to more freedom. And it was always the opposite, and not really having an honest accounting about how much work this thing that was supposed to lead to freedom would cause me. And I did that over and over and over again until I didn't even know what end was up. And I think that probably was the biggest trap for me.
Yeah. I love that. You hit the gas. You hit the gas and then fell into what I call like the when-then trap. Okay, when I make this much money, then I'll be able to take time off. Or when I have this many clients, then I'll feel happy and I'll be able to give myself a break. And it never ends because we're constantly moving the goalpost.
Totally. Yeah,
and
also really just tricky. Just responding to all the needs. Every time you add more complexity, there's just more things to distract you, and like kind of being in a hive mind and just responding to things as they go, and not losing the strategy and losing the vision and the day-to-day grind of it all. I think that was paralyzing at some point.
Yeah. Ari, what about you? Anything you want to add big picture to what you see happen when people start their own businesses?
Yeah. Well, the when then makes me think of something that you said repeatedly when we were working together. What got you here won't get you there, And so I wanted to just echo that seed that was planted so many years ago. I think a lot of business owners, even if they're not quote unquote helpers or healers or therapists, get into their own business also to be of service, right? And they don't necessarily do the inner work or have the support to determine what that means for them without completely burning themselves out. And I think that it does feel good. Like there is an aspect of like when you get into business and you do get those awesome clients in front of you and you get to do it. But then what happens is then in my case, I can't speak for everyone. It's really hard to say no. It's really hard to disappoint. It's really hard when folks are projecting their needs on you and you have your own conditioning, you have your own baggage and patterns that you bring that are how you show up when people project their needs on you and their wants on you and are unconsciously or consciously being like, help me, save me, fix this for me. And that's when I feel like we can get in a really dangerous trap of overworking, of overdoing, of losing sight of what matters to us because we're so sucked into the needs of our clients, as we should be, quote unquote, as we should be, right? Because we're running a business. So that's a big trap too.
I do feel like that's one of the biggest shifts from working for someone else to working for ourselves is you don't realize when you're working for someone else all of the things you're not carrying, right? And like all of the responsibilities and the burdens that never even cross your mind because the owner of the business is holding that weight, right? The weight of making sure clients are happy and enough clients are coming in and, how's our cash flow? Is it in a good place? You don't think about that stuff. You just kind of show up, do your work and leave. And people don't prep you for that change when you go into business for yourself. I don't know that there really is even a way to be prepped for that. Honestly, you just kind of have to experience it. But I really appreciate what you're both saying about how when you step into business for yourself, everything changes. Everything about the way that you work, about what you have to do to be successful. And we're really not prepared for any of it. So it hits us like a tidal wave, right? Okay. We're going to talk more about that in just a second, but I want to zoom out here for a moment and say that the Deeply Rested podcast is based on my belief that your business should serve you first and your clients second. And this took me many years as an entrepreneur to figure out inside of myself. But when I discovered that part of the reason I was so burnt out and exhausted was that I was people pleasing to the max, right? I was trying to create a business that served everybody first. And like maybe there would be some crumbs left over for me at the end. I was like, that doesn't make sense. I need to reverse that. The reason that I'm not working for someone else is because rewind to that vision, that fantasy that you painted when you decided to take the plunge into entrepreneurship. Like that's why I did this. So that needs to be my measuring stick, right? I need to make sure that this business is serving me with the freedom and flexibility that I need to live my best life. My clients, my team, they're all beneficiaries of the business that I create. The two of you were beneficiaries of my offerings, of my services. But at the core, I did it for me. And I did it to help me live a life that I wanted to live. So I believe that really, really strongly. And I also know that it's hard to do, right? It's hard to break those rules and to change those paradigms as we operate businesses here in late stage capitalism. But that's what we're talking about on this podcast is how do we create a business that serves me first as the business owner and everybody else is secondary to me making sure that I get what I need. We're going to get really practical about that a little later on. But first, I want to go a bit deeper, if you're both open to it, to talking about the challenges that you have faced personally as business owners. And I think the best way to do that is to take yourselves back in your mind's eye to the day that you called me years ago, the day that you called me and you're like, Maegan, I think I want to join your mastermind. I think I want to work. I want to work with you. I want you to see if you can remember what you were feeling at the time, what was happening in your business, what wasn't working for you personally. And I want to just hear a little bit from both of you about kind of the dark days of being a business owner. Big question, but we want to hear it. Like, let's just be honest here with each other, with listeners about how hard this can be. Annie, I'm going to start with you. Tell me, paint me a picture of the dark days, please.
I remember it so well. January 2021, after sitting on an uncomfortable chair for a year in my dark basement apartment, looking at a fence, seeing clients every day who were panicked, distressed, and I was somehow supposed to provide calm as I was panicked and distressed in my basement apartment in my uncomfortable chair. And I had I had expanded my business into a group practice along with some other services that were a huge investment in September of 2019. So now I'm an employer. I have an office in a high rent area that is not being used. I have employees that are stressed. And I am working so hard and watching everybody on social media make sourdough bread. And it was dark.
That was the worst.
It was
the
worst. Like, totally. Like, I was just like,
I was like, I'm getting paid not to work, and I'm like making sourdough, and I was like, fuck you guys.
Totally.
You're a sourdough starter and your crochet project.
Needlepoint. Yeah, it was everybody's working out and doing yoga. And I was just like, my butt just spread a mile wide in 1 year. It was tough, but I was working harder than ever. And also feeling, I think there was, as a therapist, I was just not feeling the same level of like, I'm making a difference. I just felt like I was swimming in the soup of disturbance, which I think was leading also to the burnout. I was working harder, but seeing less of the results that I had seen over the course of my career, while also holding space for employees who were distressed. And I just, my hopefulness, my sense of self was demeaning. I was tired. I was overwhelmed. And there was just some, like, it wasn't depression, but it felt depression-esque. But there was just this shift in me that was happening, and a darkness that was coming over that felt really antithetical to who I am. And I started to Google, trying to figure out what's wrong with me, Dr.
As
Google.
you do.
As you do. I don't know that I was that familiar with what burnout was, just maybe starting to come on the horizon, the word, in any kind of significant way. So it wasn't like in my consciousness, but I found you and you had some offering for burnout, and I signed up for your newsletter, and you sent me this sweet little loom. And
the loom,
like, I knew,
man.
The loom.
Yeah.
It was so sweet. I was dark and I was alone and I didn't know what was happening. And so I get this cute little message that I hadn't opened the thing about, the offering to help with burnout. And I was like, I messaged back, I'm too burnt out to read the thing on burnout.
To watch your thing about burnout.
Yeah.
Real.
Yeah. So that was kind of the start of our relationship. And I just remember you responding, and I just started to see what was happening. And it was probably, I think, about 6 months later. But at that point, I started to get curious about a sabbatical. And this was so revolutionary at the point that I was desperate. I was like, I can't go on. If I don't do something, I'm not going to be able to be a therapist. I'm not going to have a business. So that was the moment of great transition for me, where like, this cannot go on. It was rough. No, it was dark.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for taking us back there, Annie. I know it's not comfortable to relive those memories. It's so real. Also kind of fun to have a moment of pandemic venting. I know we've done that together, but I just feel like collectively small business owners need to hear, like, it was really fucking annoying when most people were chilling, living their best lives, and we were really suffering. We were scared. It's like when your clients start drying up because scary things are happening in their lives and you don't know how you're going to make ends meet, it's like that panic sets in a real way. And I know one thing that's so aligned for all three of us is that we are the primary or sole income earners in our household. So there's like that stress on top as well. So that feels really unique, right? Like this unique moment, this strange moment in time, Annie, when your burnout hit. But I think the reality is like that burnout was going to hit you even if the pandemic didn't come. It just sort of sped up
real fast
trajectory. But like you were on that trajectory. Because everything that you're describing, it's like you were making all of these decisions in your business that you were supposed to make. Okay, now I'm supposed to hire someone, and now I'm supposed to offer this thing, and I'm supposed to grow in this way. And it was never really values aligned. You didn't know that yet. So you were making all of these decisions, learning all of these lessons, and then the stress sets in, and then the panic sets in, and then the overwhelm sets in. And all of a sudden, the business isn't working for you, but you also don't feel like you have a way out. And I think this is where so many of us really land in the depths of burnout, is when we have that golden handcuff experience where the business is working, but it's working on the outside, but it's not working for us on the inside, but we feel too chained to the income and to the way that the business is built to make a significant change. I also really appreciate, Annie, what you said about burnout. I'm connecting two dots in something that you shared. Burnout feels a lot like depression.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, it can be really hard to discern. When you're deep in burnout, it can be hard to discern, is this burnout or is this depression? Because they feel so similar. I really appreciate you naming that.
Yeah.
Okay, totally heard, Annie. Like, we've been there. We get it. Ari, what about you? How would you describe the dark days of your business?
Oh my God. Well, I've never actually heard Annie's story before. We just met through your program. So hearing this, I love, obviously I don't love it, but that you had to experience that. But it's interesting to hear the threads that I didn't know we had even before we crossed paths. I actually found Maegan through group practice exchange because, and you talked me out of starting a group practice. Thank fucking God. And so
it's one of my favorite pastimes.
Yes. Like I remember that conversation because I think I was driving I was like sitting in my vet's parking lot or something. And you were like, you really want to do this? So yeah, so similar thread to Annie of like, I was experiencing a boom in both of my businesses after that initial scary time. And oh my gosh. So for me, I found you, it was April of 2021. And it was the Rest and Success Code, your summit. And I just listened to every single episode. And there was just something about it that felt dramatically different than any other message I was getting from business owners. And then ultimately from like business coaches. And ultimately when we decided to work together, it was because your approach was so vastly different than just grind and hustle. And so for me, I was like sitting also in like a 1-bedroom apartment. I had just ended a serious relationship and quote unquote, like temporarily moved into a little 1-bedroom apartment, which ended up being my home for a lot longer. And so I also was staring at this blank screen. I was, seeing clients sometimes from like 7:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. And, during that time for therapy, like before the pandemic, my practice had a nice natural ebb and flow, I would say. Clients come in and clients come out. But once the pandemic hit, everyone was doing therapy. Everyone who you had ever worked with at any point in your career was reaching back out to start again. And no one was ending therapy. So there was no natural attrition. And as I mentioned, I'm really great at saying no when people need help during a crisis. And so before I knew it, my caseload had dramatically grown. And I was starting to have really bad physical symptoms and neurological symptoms and chronic pain, which was not something that was part of my bodily experience before. So I was feeling really scared of how my body was responding to this burnout. And then also my copywriting business at that time, all these therapists couldn't rely on physical marketing methods. And they're like, let's update our copy. And so, of course, I wanted to support these therapists in getting their clients. And so I truly was having, for all intents and purposes, and you named this earlier, I was very quote unquote successful, right? Like through standard measures of business and income, this was great. But I couldn't say no. I couldn't discern who was a good fit for me. And also, I didn't have the infrastructure for this growth too. There was no intentionality to this growth. It was almost a parasitic type of growth, right? As opposed to an intentional, slow, seasonal growth.
I just love, again, I don't love it because it sucks, but I appreciate, maybe that's better. Like, I appreciate all of the themes, like the themes in both of your stories and my story around burnout, and how burnout, I'm realizing this moment, it can come from two sources, right? It can come from a place of real scarcity where you don't have enough clients, you don't have enough money, you can't pay your bills. Like your business is not succeeding in conventional terms. And you get burnt out because you're just running so hard on that hamster wheel. Like you run out of fuel so fast. We've all been there. We've all known people who have been in that place. And that burnout it's real and it's hard to get out of.
Yeah.
Similar but different than the type of burnout that comes from what the two of you are describing, which I'm going to call, as you know, coming from a place of having abundance problems, right? Like when we have abundance problems in our business, it's like, it's really complicated. It's paradoxical because on the one hand, we're like, wait, I'm succeeding. And everyone on the outside thinks I'm doing so great and they don't understand why I'm complaining or why I'm struggling. But on the inside, it's like, sure, maybe there's a lot of abundance flowing in the business. There's enough money, there's enough clients, but I am so out of alignment with what I want to be doing, what feels sustainable for my body, my mind, my soul, two very different burnout presentations, if you will. But the core experience is the same. It feels a lot like depression, feels like, I don't know if I can do this another day. I don't know if entrepreneurship is for me. We start doubting our decision. We start fantasizing about what would happen if I, got a job at Starbucks or the library or, just like went back to some other way of working. It's a spiral, right? We get pulled into this kind of dark place where we're doubting ourselves and we feel really uncertain about what to do next. And this really is a pivot point, I think, for a lot of small business owners where they're sitting on this precipice of having to decide, I love what I do, but I can't continue doing it like this. Or maybe I don't love what I do, and I definitely can't continue doing it like this. Either way, we're not sure what comes next, right? We're not sure how to get ourselves to a better place. And that is where the deeply rested work comes into play, because we all know, the three of us know as therapists, right, that you have to be resourced and rested in order to see clearly, right, in order to be able to find the answer to your own question so that you can navigate yourself out of sticky situations. But how? How do we come back to a place of being resourced and rested when we are so deep in burnout? That's where we're going next. Are you ready for this?
Yeah.
All right. We're entering Act 2 of the conversation. Let's get out of the dark days.
Let's get out of the sourdough era.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Exiting the sourdough era and entering a season of hope. There are so many like metaphors we could draw on here, but I won't go down that. I won't go down that rabbit hole. So for years, I knew, as in my work, I would probably say, this work started for me in 2018, right? I hit burnout. I was running a group practice. I was doing business coaching. I was seeing a full caseload of therapy clients, and I just hit a breaking point. I was on a retreat, actually, with a group of business owners, and I just had total meltdown. They were all laughing in the living room, playing games, and I was in my bedroom in the house, just sobbing. And I'm just oh, I'm so unhappy and I'm so stressed. And I was having a much needed meltdown, right? That meltdown really needed to happen. And I connected in this meltdown to this kind of core truth that I needed to take a sabbatical. I needed a break, a significant break. I had to just unplug from everything I had created and really tend to myself, which is a conversation we'll have in a future episode about sabbaticals and the power of sabbaticals. But it was during that sabbatical that I took over winter of 2018, 2019, that it really clarified for me. It was clarified for me that the only way I could do this sustainably was if I discovered a path to being both successful and deeply rested. I had to be rested. Everything for me starts on a foundation of rest. Mm-hmm. So I spent the next year really swimming in the philosophy of that idea, okay, deeply rested, wildly successful. Love the sound of that. How do I do that? I want to figure out how to make that real. And there were several years when all of my offerings were more philosophical in nature. We were talking about the idea of it. I hadn't yet really figured out, how do I make this practical? And I'm saying that for anybody listening who's sitting on a really great philosophical idea. Sometimes we do just have to be with really good ideas and let them unfold over time. Let the path to the big idea reveal itself to us over time. And I will say it took 2.5, 3 years before the idea of being deeply rested and wildly successful was really translated for me in practical terms. So I'll share a brief story of the moment when deep rest as I work with it today was born. It was a couple of years ago. I think it was about 2 years ago. And I, again, was like really stressed out. Just had too much on my plate. I was feeling pretty crispy, really needed a break, but I felt like I had all of these to-dos on my plate, like couldn't take time off. I was just stuck in an old pattern, right? Old pattern, but I was stuck in it. And I woke up one morning, I think it was a Tuesday, and I could not open my laptop. I just couldn't do it. I also happened to be in the middle of reading A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. Okay. And this is a side conversation for later. But once you get into the Sarah J. Maas ecosystem, like you can't get out. Annie knows, Ari knows. You just get sucked in. You can't get out. I was like so obsessed with these books. I hadn't been obsessed with a series in a long time. All I wanted to do that day was sit in my love sack in front of the fireplace reading A Court of Thorns and Roses. Book 3, I was at the climax of the 3rd book in the trilogy. Shit was hitting the fan. Like I had to know what happened next, and I did not want to go to work. So I'm like, you know what? I'm a business owner. I'm taking the day off. I'm going to sit in this love sack. I'm going to read this book. And I was like, I'm going to do it. So I did it. I like took the day off, emailed my assistant, told everybody who needed to know, like, I'm not coming into work today. And I laid in my love sack and I proceeded to spend like the next 6 hours going through this process where I was both reading the book and feeling horrifically guilty for reading the book. Like I felt like so guilty. I felt so bad. My inner critic, like she was loud. Like, what's wrong with you? You're being so selfish right now. Nobody else gets to do this in the real world. Like I was not enjoying my rest. I was just feeling guilty about my rest. And then I started, as I do, like meta processing, like this conversation I was having with my inner critic, I was like, what is happening? Like, this is so messed up. And that was the moment when the switch was really flipped for me. And I was like, oh, hold on a second. Why did I go into business for myself? Because I wanted to be able to care for myself in whatever way I needed to, whatever way I wanted to. I wanted freedom. I wanted flexibility. I wanted the ability to say, you know what? It's a Tuesday, and what I need today is rest. And what that rest looks like for me today is getting lost in a fictional world. And that is in service of the work I do in the world. That's in service of my business. So I started thinking about this idea, right? Where I was like, okay, what if I am working today? Like, what if sitting in my love sack reading Sarah J. Maas, like, is my work today? It's how I'm resting. It's how I'm recharging my batteries. Like, this is work. So then I started thinking about, well, why am I feeling so guilty? Like, really, what is at the root of my feeling guilty? And I put my finger pretty quickly on because I'm not making money. It's like, ooh, God, that like capitalist conditioning runs so deep, right? Where you just realize if I'm not doing something that's, quote, generating revenue, then I'm a bad business owner. Mm-hmm. I'm a bad therapist if I'm not seeing clients. I'm a bad service provider if I'm not working on, someone's deliverables. It's like I'm bad if I'm not doing something that generates revenue. So I started thinking, like, well, what if we expanded the definition of revenue? Like, what if my business's job wasn't only to generate money, which is the traditional way we think about revenue. Like, what if my business's job was to generate creative revenue, right? To generate time to rest. And then I was like, oh my God, rest is revenue. And I was like, am I having a great idea that's also an alliteration at the same time? What? Freaked out. I was like, hold on, I have a great idea. It's coming. It's right. Oh my God, it's an alliteration. I was freaking out. I had finished the book at this point, so I needed something new to obsess over. And it was this idea. And I was like, rest is revenue. I want my business to generate rest. I want my business to generate time. I want my business to generate creativity and inspiration, like Annie was saying earlier. And I want all of those things to be just as valuable as the money that I create, right? Non-monetary revenue. What is it? What do I want? How can I use my business as a vehicle to create it? And from there, the practical application it just started unfolding so quickly. And the two of you have been along with me for that journey on the client side of my offerings. So I'm going to shut my mouth now. I just told you a really long story. Thank you for listening. And I want to hear from both of you what this process has been like for you. What has it been like to recognize that your business could pay you in more creative ways? How has it felt to make those changes? And most importantly, how is your business now generating more creative revenue for you individually? Those are a lot of questions. I'll help you unpack them if you get a little bit stuck. Annie, do you want to kick us off and tell us about the Rest is Revenue journey for you?
Yeah, I definitely feel like I'm still on it. Yeah, it's fluid. It's just so interesting. Like well, let me take a step back. The fall of 2021, which was at the time I was starting to work with you, I took a 3-month sabbatical with my husband, and we left California and came to Washington, a place that I had dreamed living in for over a decade, but really didn't feel was possible. And we were coming to visit family, but also just to take time off and see what was next, like just clear the deck. Interestingly, even though I wasn't seeing clients, I was still working. I had started a mastermind and I was still supervising a clinician. So like my husband likes to remind me, like, you didn't actually stop working, but it was significant nonetheless. It really was. I think what was just the ability to provide that for myself. It was so necessary, but like what emerged out of that was just life-changing. And so I feel like that period of time and also investing in coaching at that point, all of my investment from the revenue of my business went into meeting the needs of my clients. Trainings, books, everything that I read, everything that I did, like a huge portion of the revenue I made went into how can I serve my clients. And there had never been a moment where I was like, what do I need? I thought that I was investing into myself, and to some extent I was, but it was never oriented to what do I want? What do I need? What am I feeling called to? It was very service oriented. So this whole shift to taking rest and using my business to invest in that and into a program that was really focused on me as the business owner, but also as a person, a creative person in the world that has needs, was the greatest investment of capital and energy that I could have ever made, because everything changed from that moment on. And it's still unfolding today, all these years later. It's pretty wild. And whenever I support somebody in this process, especially in taking a sabbatical, it's like, you're not really going to understand what this time means for you for a lot. Like you'll understand as you go, but more in retrospect. And in that process was just space to start to calm my nervous system down. And it took the whole 3 months. Like the first 2 months, I was still vibrating like this. But as I started to unwind and just take long walks and be in nature and listen to what I wanted to listen to and read what I wanted to read, which it took me a while to get there too, it's just the creativity, the insight, the self-energy that had been obscured and suppressed started to emerge. And with it, possibility that wasn't connected to how can I make myself better for other people, but how do I want to be in the world? What am I really about? Like long-standing dreams and passions and ideas started to come back and merge with who I was then. And that continues to happen. And a whole world started to open up, and personally and professionally, also relationally. And so none of that would have been possible had I not had the freedom that came from being a business owner and also pivoting again, having the power to pivot and take that time for myself.
There's something so powerful about the permission giving process that we have to go through as we're starting to decondition ourselves from an obsession with money, money and constant upward trajectory, right? Yeah. Like this is what we're conditioned to believe is success. I have to make more money quarter after quarter. Is the profit increasing? Are we like climbing the ladder to nowhere? And it takes really conscious decision making to slow ourselves down and to say, actually, I don't want to climb that ladder to nowhere. Actually, I want to get really clear about how much money I need. Actually, I want to make sure that the work I'm doing in the world feels really aligned with what my soul is asking of me right now. And like you said earlier, Annie, I want to be able to pivot and change my mind. I want to go to the left and then 2 years later take a sharp turn to the right and let this process be fluid and unfolding. And the more you did that, the more you gave yourself permission to make these unconventional choices, the easier it became to attune to who am I and what do I need and what do I want my business to create for me.
Totally.
Am I getting that right?
Yeah. And even probably on top of all of that, and most importantly, the question of what is it all for? What is it all for? And that's a big question to ask. And there had been no space or capacity to ask that question. What is this all for?
And I love that because that is the question we get to start asking ourselves when we leave the 9 to 5, right? When we leave the jobs we're working for someone else, we get to say, what is my work all for? What is my business all for? And the possibilities are so much more expansive than when we're working for somebody else.
Yeah.
Okay. Ari, what do you think about what Annie is sharing?
Oh my gosh. I was just mesmerized. And I know that there'll be a conversation later about sabbaticals, but my sabbatical was so, when I think of my rest is revenue journey, it really started, working with you. And I remember this one, you talked me out of starting a group practice, thank God. And then I was like, oh, but I want to scale my copywriting business. And I remember this was October of 2021, where we were talking about ideas for my lead magnet and stuff. And you said, with your like piercing kindness, do you need a sabbatical? And I started sobbing, and it was just, my body was just like, yes, 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 give me a break. And then my sabbatical, I took it for 2 months, summer of 2022. And I have to thank you both, because I talked to Annie before I took my sabbatical, and I was like, what advice do you have? And hers was, don't work. Best thing, right? Don't work. And Maegan, yours was, don't decide while you're on sabbatical. And so then when I was on sabbatical, that was my first experience, visceral experience, skeptical at first, that rest is revenue, because everything that happened in those 2 months that I was not, quote unquote, making money transformed the way I do business. And I'm still having benefits from that today. And so being able to detox to rest my nervous system. A lot of people imagine like sabbaticals to just be this great time. I was actually pretty miserable during the time. I got COVID for, I think, the first time. So 2 weeks of that, I was really sick with COVID. My nervous system would not relax for about 2 to 3 weeks. And so there was like a juicy period in there. And that's, though, on my sabbatical, when I started to really reconnect to like my natural rhythms and the way I wanted to work and my energy flowed. And so the biggest way that my rest is revenue shows up for me now is my slow mornings. Before I went on sabbatical, I thought I was a morning person. Turns out I'm not. I actually like to sleep in until 8 or 9 a.m. every day. I didn't get up today until 8 a.m., and so now the way my business pays me is I don't have to start a meeting until 10 a.m. if I don't want to. If I'm doing it earlier, it's because of something that I have discerned lights me up and what I want to do, but really 10 a.m. is my cutoff. So that's a way that like rest is revenue for me right now. I also have started, I feel it's a little bit more in my copywriting business because I do creative work, but I write when I'm walking, when I'm thinking, when I'm dreaming, when I'm sleeping, and I come to my desk when I need to execute it. I don't sit at my desk and write. All my writing happens when I'm on a walk. I just had the other day, I was cooking and I came up with an email for my newsletter. I wasn't making money, but I don't even remember what I was. And so I have this like really awesome newsletter coming out. And then also the rest is revenue. I have a whole list. I'm not looking at it now. I'm just going off where my heart's going. But the slow mornings, being able to pursue whatever interests I want. So for me, learning is so nourishing. And so now my business, I don't care if it's quote unquote clinical or not. It's paying me in order to learn what I want to learn because it is nurturing me as a person, not as how I can. Annie, you said this, right? Everything you were doing was in service to what your clients need. Clients going through a divorce, I'm going to read this book about divorce, right? As opposed to this has nothing to do with what my clients are experiencing, but it's interesting to me. And then rest is revenue, the traditional time off, freedom, flexibility. There is I know this isn't the case for everyone, but I pretty much can do anything I want with my schedule. Anything. And that I feel like is revenue. Like that's revenue that I get a last minute invite to go do this. I'm going to go. My parents are flying in and I don't have to be like, oh, sorry, I don't have to work. I don't have PTO. It's not even a question. I'm taking that time off, So juicy.
Wow. It's so juicy. I love hearing both of you just give us these really practical examples of what is your business generating for you. And again, so much of it comes down to freedom and flexibility. If you're willing to give yourself permission to choose you, right? You have to give yourself permission to choose. My business is here to serve me first and foremost. My clients are secondary to my needs being served. And then the magical thing that happens that you're both speaking to is that the more I invest in all parts of myself, right? Not just the therapist part or the service-oriented part, but the more I invest in all parts of myself and the more I tend to my needs so that my work is sustainable and my life is like juicy and delicious and so slow and abundant, the clearer I get about how I want to serve and what I want to write about in my newsletter and what I'm feeling really fired up about offering or selling. Business gets easier the more you tend to yourself first and foremost, and the more you let your business be an expression of your own personal growth and the quiet whispers you hear from your intuition, your soul's calling, however you want to conceptualize it, the more you prioritize those parts of your lived experience, the juicier and more profitable and more sustainable your business becomes. And hearing the two of you share your lived experience of that process unfolding in real time is so inspiring. And I love it. I'm so grateful to hear all of these examples. I also had no idea that you were both going to talk about your sabbaticals and how important the sabbatical was as kind of a kickoff to the deeply rested journey. And most people don't know this because I haven't talked about it a lot yet, but we're working behind the scenes on building out sabbatical school. Mm-hmm. And we're hoping next year, that's really what we are focusing on is helping people go through the sabbatical process because it's not easy. It's not easy to work up to the point where you can step away and still pay yourself while you're gone. I think of sabbaticals as opportunities for deep personal healing. Right? Sabbaticals are not vacation. I also don't like productivity-based sabbaticals, right? That's fine, like for academia or whatever, people who want to take a sabbatical to write their book. Cool. If that juices you up, do it. But what most of us need, small business owners at least, like we need sabbaticals where we really get to meet ourselves and we get to take the time to let our nervous systems regulate so that we can ask these big questions. Like Annie said, what is it all for? Right? Like Ari said, what do I actually want to be doing? And I guarantee you on the other side of that sabbatical, you will have a lot more information about what you need than you do right now, today, in the middle of burnout. You cannot make a decision about your future from inside of burnout. You just can't. It's not possible. Yeah. Annie, any reflections you want to offer to Ari's story before we move forward?
I mean, so much of what she said resonated with me. And this part about being able to show up for what matters for you in your life. And like, to me, I think that's the greatest revenue for your own health needs, for your spiritual needs, for your relational needs, like having that flexibility to be there for the significant events in life for your family and friends, I think is one of the most invaluable aspects of my business. And prioritizing that actually, like my health, my needs, my family's needs, and my chosen family people's needs come first. And that has always been a huge value for me. But initially, the way that I was working was taking me away from that value. And so often the people that I'm providing service for are struggling with that as well. So if I'm caught in that same system and I'm providing service to help people with that, how does that work if I'm out of alignment myself? And so I think one of the beautiful things about this process of like rest is revenue and doing the healing work around that and taking time to figure out what all that means for me has actually empowered me to be a much better provider of services. I'm healthier, I'm more grounded, I'm more present, and I'm also living in alignment with myself, which like I have found that seems to really provide a much greater foundation for the work that I provide. Right? I'm being what I need.
We're breaking cycles.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you're showing up to somebody who is out of alignment and is prioritizing you in a way that's at their expense, like what are you signaling to that person who's probably struggling with that as well? Let's get real. Most of us are. We're living in hustle culture. So it's a lot to unwind that. So it just feels like one of the greatest gifts is to come back in alignment with my values and who I really am in the services that I provide and what that looks like.
And the gift of the ripple effect. Right? When we break a rule, right? When we say like, okay, I'm not going to follow this rule of late stage capitalism. I'm not going to adhere to like this branch of conditioning from the patriarchy. When we break those rules, like we ripple effect magic out into the collective, right? We give other people permission to do the same. And the change it ripples, and we need more people throwing stones in the lake, right? Like that's what we need. Ari, what do you think?
I mean, it's courageous work, right? Like I think that's worth naming for anyone listening. Like this is courageous work. And when I think of the rest is revenue, just bouncing off what Annie shared, part of my sabbatical, when I had that experience of what is revenue that isn't financial, it's really relational. And I read this book, How We Show Up by Mia Birdsong, which is all about just the way we have like late stage capitalism has also caused this toxic individualism, right? And I think sometimes when we get caught up in the hustle culture, we don't realize that actually our most valuable resources might not be financial. I mean, they are to an extent because we do live in capitalism, but that was something that I really took away from my sabbaticals. Like, oh, my clients aren't going to be there. And so why am I investing so much energy in that if it's not actually leveraging me to build a life for when I'm no longer working, right? If I'm not being like, once again, our business is paying us to get on this call and foster and nourish this relationship between the three of us as friends. And I think Maegan, I mean, maybe this, you do or don't want to speak to this, but you shifted from client to friendship with us, right? And for intents and purposes, from capitalist perspective, we're not paying you anymore, right? Like now you have this relational value.
You're not?
I lost your
checks in the mail, checks in the mail.
Right? But I think I really want to name this because this was a really hard one for me as someone who's ambitious and driven and can sometimes avoid intimacy with my work. I think there's some real courage when you start to decondition and you start to see the ways that you've been hiding through overworking, right? And my sabbatical is some of the most profound therapy work that I ever did. And it made me realize my clients are not revenue, right? Like they are part of my work and they are part of my service and my purpose, but they aren't revenue. The revenue is my physical health. It's the joy that I cultivate every day. It's the friendships that I have. It's the way I prioritize what's important to me.
Oh man, you're both saying, I wish we had 18 more hours with this conversation.
I know, right?
There's like so many things we could dive into, but if we simplify this, it's like, imagine a pie chart, and the pie chart is like business revenue. Right now, probably 100% of that pie chart is money in the bank. And then we reverse engineer from there, and it's like, okay, well, I need X amount of clients paying me this much in order to get this much revenue. And it becomes very transactional And I love that you're speaking to this, Ari, right? It's not about relationships. It's about individuation. We're all separate people kind of fighting for our own, fighting for our piece of the pie. And then we're just obsessed with money, and there isn't intimacy, and there isn't this relational component that for many of us is what makes life worth living. So think about your pie and ask yourself, what do I want more of in my life? What are my core values? And how can my business be the vehicle that delivers all of those things to me on a silver platter? And if you feel a little bit lost in that process, hopefully you're feeling inspired by all of the phenomenal examples that Annie and Ari have shared. But what I really want you to do is to go back, rewind 45 minutes ago when we said, hey, take a second to remember why you wanted to go into business for yourself before you did, when it was just a fantasy and you were painting that picture of what you thought your life would be like, how life would be better when you weren't working for someone else. What were the specifics of that picture? Because that's going to give you a really great idea of what your business needs to pay you in today, right? Is it more time to be with your family? Do you want to be able to pick your kids up from school when they're sick? Right? Do you want to be able to travel more? Do you want to be able to experiment with like different ideas and different offerings? It doesn't matter. It could be anything. It could be literally anything. And what's true for you should be different than what's true for Annie, what's true for Ari, what's true for me. That's part of the magic of becoming deeply rested, is the way in which we deeply attune to ourselves and get really honest with ourselves about what we want in this life. And then we reverse engineer and ask ourselves, how can my business be the thing that creates the freedom, the flexibility, the financial abundance, the relational abundance, the creativity, the magic, all of it. I want all of it. And we can have all of it as long as we're willing to break some rules along the way. And like Ari said, that's not for the faint of heart. It is a courageous process, but if it calls to you, follow the call, because I think the three of us can attest to how much happier we all are on the other side of this work. And the last thing that I want to speak to today is this other thing that we have in our friendship together. And actually, let me take one step back. And thanks for highlighting that, Ari. You're so right that in a traditional business model, any business book you read will tell you that the easiest way to make money is to sell new things to people who have paid you before, right? Like every marketing book, every sales book, it's going to talk about like repeat customers, the power of repeat customers. So traditional business strategy would absolutely say, okay, Annie and Ari already paid high ticket to be in one of your masterminds. Keep selling them. Make something new. Make something bigger. Make something more expensive. And they'll keep buying from you.
We would.
And you would. And I know, and that's, it's like, I get it. I get the logic of that, right? It makes sense. But there's something about the rigidity of that paradigm that doesn't work for me. Like I want relationships. And this is a great example of, we got to the point in our working relationship where I could have created something new and sold it to you, and you would have bought it, and I would have been honored, and we would have had a great experience together. But my heart was saying, actually, you want friendship with Annie and Ari, and they want friendship with you. So have a big grown-up conversation about how to change boundaries and expectations in your relationship, and experience with something new, and trust that more clients are going to come your way. You don't have to just think of Annie and Ari as cash cows for the next 15 years. It is a really big paradigm shift. And I think it's a great example of like letting your business, apparently my business wants to pay me in friendships. And I'm here for that. Like I'm totally here for that. Okay, fun tangent. Thanks for calling that out, Ari. The last thing I want to say about this process, and this is something the three of us are really actively discovering now still, is that when you do all of this work that we've described, all of the deconditioning and the taking the sabbatical and the recharging and the making these massive systemic changes so that your business really works for you, and you start investing in all parts of yourself in new, more expansive ways, it's a lot. And it takes time, and there's no hurry. You cannot be behind on your own journey. It's one of my favorite bits of wisdom. You can't be behind on your own journey. So you take your time. But eventually you land in this place where your primary job becomes personal growth and healing and becoming more of your true self, your authentic self, bringing more of your authentic self into your life, becoming more self-expressed in your business. Like the road just leads to that destination. And I know the three of us are so in that individually and together right now. One way that that has shown up for all three of us is in really connecting and being more out with our woo identities, our witchy identities, our relationship to magic and intuition and spirituality. And we have actually, the three of us in our group chat, you have a real friendship when you have a group chat, like that's when things get real. We titled it The Dark Coven. Because people are like, let's be a coven of witches and let's be dark. We're not dark at all, but we're like, let's be dark. So Dark Coven, I would love to hear just a little bit. We need to wrap up pretty soon, but just a little bit from both of you about the self-discovery process and what's happening in your work now as you're giving yourself permission to be more of who you've always been. Ari, let's start with you.
Yeah, I will start. I mean, my sabbatical was when I started reading tarot and working and expanding my spirituality every day. That if I were to describe a quote unquote spiritual awakening, would be that. But I feel, you named it, like I get to be more out around my witchy woo-ness and talk about copywriting and tarot. I'm actually launching tarot reading offerings today for witchy folks and woo curious. And like, I never would have thought I would be doing that, but I'm just like, yeah, like, let me see how I can help you in this way. And so that's probably like the biggest shift, and just being unapologetic about who I am in my business and having who I am help people as opposed to what I do.
Whoa, having who I am be the medicine as opposed to, quote, what I do, what my certification is, what my offering is. Like those are all external packages, right? That are like bundling up what has always been inside, and you're just reversing it, right? You're like, let me just lead with who I am, and what I do is, it doesn't really matter. It's just window dressing.
The medicine is, and if who you are is what matters and creates the transformation, then of course that is going to be your biggest investment is in yourself and in your personal development, right? Like you were saying.
That's right. Yeah. Beautiful.
Delicious.
Annie, what's coming up for you?
I think one of my great insights and healing points along this journey is the way in which my work became a giant manifestation of my survival strategies as a child, and the way in which I'm, in that I'm very skilled at using my intuition to figure out what people need and figuring out how I can provide that for them while disowning parts of myself and not showing up fully as I am. And I'm really good at it, and created a whole business around it as a therapist. And but in that was this process of disowned parts of myself not being nurtured, or when they showed up in my work, feeling like I was guilty or bad or shameful for letting those parts of me emerge. But as stepping into this piece that Ari is speaking so eloquently to, realizing that I can't continue to do work that doesn't allow an integrated whole to be there, that who I am and the way I show up is the medicine, and I'm co-creating in alchemy with whoever I'm serving. The whole needs to be present, and what emerges out of that is the medicine. And I'm still in my process of figuring out how that manifests for me moving forward. But the process of coming into that, acknowledging that, realizing that, and stepping into that really vulnerable place of being who I really am and understanding what that is layer by layer, step by step, is so liberating. Like it is like to me, the foundation of freedom is like really showing up who and how you are to the best of your ability and wisdom and knowledge now, and trusting the process that you will be guided. And it's a lot of work to trust the process, but it's a beautiful journey. And the magic that unfolds from that. And part of that is just like letting your wooey witchy self be present.
That's right.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And you're letting your wooey witchy self come out into the world through Delightfully Free, which is the business you're creating for child-free women. I just want to shout out that Annie's been hosting these incredible moon circles on Zoom for child-free women. Ari and I have been attending since January, and it's like a place, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Annie, where you're really stepping into the truth of who you are with other people.
Yeah. Absolutely. And thanks to the two of you for having your little fingerprints on my back, pushing me along to do it. But yeah, it's so vulnerable, but it's exhilarating, like showing up as your whole self and in community with each other. It's to see what happens when you show up as your whole self is just pure magic. It really is.
It is. It literally is magic.
Yeah.
That's it is pure magic. And I'm really opening the doors to bringing more of my witchy spiritual self into my work, in my writing and through my newsletter, through this podcast, but really specifically in stepping back into retreat facilitation. It took a little bit of a hiatus while I was doing my own personal work, but now I'm like, no, I'm ready to let the spiritual, ceremonialist part of me into the work that I do with clients. And integrating. I mean, so much of this conversation is about integration, right? Like we're integrating all of our parts into wholeness, like you said, Annie. But we're whole all the time, right? We know that. But this is like stepping into the world as our whole selves. I love what you said about that being the foundation of freedom. It's really beautiful. So yeah, I didn't know that this was going to be part of the deeply rested equation. Back in 2019, when I first started thinking about this as like a philosophical construct, I was just thinking about how do I just not burn out, but also still make money? That's where I started with this idea. And here we are today talking about our witchy identities and our beautiful, abundant, flowing businesses, while also speaking truth to the challenges. Like it's still hard, there is effort involved in being a business owner every single day and in the deconditioning process. It's not for the faint of heart, but it is for the brave and the courageous and the people who are feeling called for more. And I really hope that this conversation today is planting seeds for the people who we were those years ago, when we first started this conversation. So I'm just like so full of deep gratitude to both of you for your friendship, for your presence, for your vulnerability in this conversation today, for being the first guests on the Deeply Rested podcast. It just feels like such a gift. Thank you both so much.
So honored to be here with two of my favorite people. And I just wish I could send this podcast back to the me 10 years ago.
Exactly.
Oh my God.
Yeah, me too.
Yes. Yeah. I can't wait for what unfolds from this too. What's going to unfold in the future episodes as you just let things organically evolve and be what they're meant to be.
Yeah. Thank you, Ari. Me too. I love being surprised. I just want to be surprised every day. I want to be surprised by, what happens when I follow those quiet whispers of intuition. It's always a delight. And I'll shout out, you mentioned earlier, Ari, that you originally found me through the Rest and Success Code, which was our fundraising event. And we're going to be sprinkling those Rest and Success Code conversations into the Deeply Rested podcast because they were so good. Those conversations
were so good. They're brilliant.
They were so special. And I just couldn't. I woke up one morning and I was like, it no longer feels right that all of these conversations are just in the vault. I felt the call to make them accessible. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to just have fresh conversations, and we're going to be like sharing Rest and Success Code conversations. So who knows, a year from now, I would love to have you both back on the podcast and we'll be like, okay, what happened? Where are we? And let's just like be so surprised. Are you down for that?
Oh yeah. We'll probably have a big cauldron right in the middle, like bubbling.
Yeah.
Yeah. We live in the woods.
Yes. It's like that dress for the job that you want memes. And it's like, we're just going to be in a shack on chicken legs in the middle of the woods stirring
herb singing.
Oh, I'm here for it. I am here for it. I'm going to send us an email in the future. I'm going to send an email to all three of us. Let's say I'm going to send it May 1st of next year that says, are we ready to schedule the 1-year podcast episode? I'm saying that in the recording for accountability. So it's like we have to do it. Okay. And we have to wrap up for today. So Annie, Ari, I want you to please tell listeners where they can find you. Ari, where can listeners find you?
Oh my gosh. So I'm at ariannasmith.com, and I would love to invite folks to join my newsletter, The Weekly Wordsmith, which the alternate name was going to be The Weekly Word Witch. And maybe it will turn that into the future. But in that, it's just an insight-packed, joyful newsletter for therapists and holistic-minded service providers that really just want to express their heart's work and attract those perfect fit clients that they love serving. And of course, you obviously are going to get content around copywriting, but also you get some woo in there. You get some, how does tarot and human design enhance your copywriting? How can you align your natural seasons to your writing process? So I'm really trying to have my newsletter be the only anti-grind copywriting newsletter out there. That's just like, no, don't work harder. Don't write more. Like, just go light a candle and they'll come to you. Yes. So I'd love for folks to be on that journey with me as my newsletter continues to evolve and I get to show up more integrated with y'all.
I love that so much, Ari. Ari's newsletter is phenomenal. It's such a delight to read. Even if you're not a therapist, if you're any kind of business owner, I think you're going to get a lot of value from Ari's newsletter, The Weekly Wordsmith. I love The Weekly Word Witch, but your last name is Smith, so it does make wordsmith like pretty cool.
I know.
I see your dilemma. Okay, we'll talk about that offline. That's really good.
I think it will turn into that in October. It will just be a seasonal weekly word witch or something like that.
Oh, fun. Okay. I love that idea. Annie, how can the people find out more about you?
Yeah, you can find out more about Delightfully Free if you're child-free and you're interested in joining a community of other child-free folks who are rooted in seasonal living and the spiritual liberated paths. That's where you'll find me at Annie Robershaw, ANNIE, Robershaw.com. And you can join my newsletter as well and learn about the moon circles and other offerings, not to be confused with my alter ego website, AnnRobershaw.com, which is my therapy practice.
My alter ego. Oh, that's so delightful. I will include links to both of your websites and your newsletters in the show notes. So if you want to connect with Annie and Ari, feel free to get on their newsletters. Highly recommend. Annie, Ari, I am so grateful to both of you for our friendship, for your sharing on this episode. I'll see you back here in 1 year, yeah?
Or later on text.
Later on text.
The dark
the group chat.
Reunite.
That's right. Chat
Such
with you
an honor
soon.
to be here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Annie.
Thank you, Maegan.
Okay, bye for now.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Deeply Rested. If you enjoyed this conversation, I would love to invite you to join the Deeply Rested weekly newsletter. You can sign up at deeplyrested.com/newsletter. I hope to meet you in my inbox very soon.